Hello, welcome back. We're continuing on with our major players of the Civil War. You want to go ahead and find the distinguished looking gentleman you see here in this picture. He is General George McClellan, and he is a West Point graduate, of course. He fought in the Mexican-American War, but he is a super ambitious and ego-driven individual. He was thirsty for power as well, and even though Lincoln's going to appoint him to the head of the army early in the war, he does not like Lincoln very much. He doesn't like Lincoln at all. He thinks he's a babbling buffoon, in fact, in one of his diary entries, and thinks he can do a much better job running the country and running the war. But he does not have ambitions to, become a dictator of any kind. But he is ambitious to the point where he wants to be president of the United States someday. Just being the head of an army is not good enough for him. He wants to be the head of the country. He is short in stature. He's definitely got little man's complex. And he was often referred to as Little Napoleon. He had a temper and was not easy to get along with. And he actually liked the fact that people thought he looked a lot like Emperor Napoleon from 150 years ago. And his narcissism and his ego really enjoyed the fact that people called him that. How he comes to be is the first battle of Bull Run that you'll learn about next week. It is a complete disaster for the Union Army. First battle on land after Fort Sumter. It's a resounding Confederate victory. The generals and officers on the field for the Union Army, they don't know what to do. The men are not disciplined enough. They either break and run or they lay down on the ground when they hear the bullets whizzing, as any normal person would, but not good for fighting a war. And as a result, the Union Army retreats from Bull Run, Virginia, back to Washington, D.C., and they are completely demoralized. And, of course, Winfield Scott was in charge of that battle, and Lincoln replaces him with George McClellan. And George McClellan creates an army, the Army of the Potomac. He whips the soldiers into shape. He puts them through enormous amounts of training. He re-outfits them. He comes up with new strategies. He calls on Lincoln to call on more volunteers to increase the number and size of his army. And the soldiers under his command really like him because he makes them feel like soldiers, and he trains them well, and he supplies them well. He takes care of his soldiers very well. So the next time they go into battle, they actually do feel confident enough that they can face the Confederates again, despite the disaster of the first two battles of Fort Sumter and Bull Run. The problem is, on the battlefield, George McClellan is very cautious. He has built this magnificent army. He has whipped it into shape. He has supplied it to the T, but he's hesitant to actually use it. And Lincoln starts to get frustrated and urges and almost commands George McClellan, since he is the commander-in-chief, Abraham Lincoln, to attack the enemy. And McClellan comes up with excuses, and he says, I'm going to start on this date, and then he pushes the date back. And then when he actually does engage the Confederates, he's terrible on the battlefield. He is outsmarted by Lee. He is outsmarted by Jackson. He is outsmarted by all the superior generalship that the South has at the beginning of the war. And he'll go into battles where he'll have a 2 to 3 man advantage over the Confederates, a 2-to-1 advantage or a 3-to-1 advantage as far as manpower. And he won't know how to use it. And he will be defeated in battle. But what will happen is he will blame everybody but himself. And eventually what happens is the Union Army has to retreat back into Washington, D.C. again. And Lincoln is so frustrated with McClellan at how slow he was to get things done and how terrible he commanded them in the field that he fires him. He fires McClellan, and he promotes another general. And he goes through 2 or 3 other generals in about a 6 to 9 month period, and they don't perform any better, to the point where things are going so bad for the Union Army going into 1862 that Lincoln has no choice but to bring McClellan back, if anything, to re-outfit and restore the morale of the Union Army once again. So Lincoln hires him, he fires him, he brings him back. McClellan does the same thing he did the first time around, and eventually Lincoln fires him again. And by the time he fires him a second time, Grant has been winning victories in the West. He's been gaining a reputation as a general who can get things done. And it's the midpoint of the war, and Lincoln finally grabs Grant and brings him to D.C. and says, you are now going to be the general in charge of the Army. And Grant, of course, is going to ride that wave to victory. George McClellan will resign his commission as general, run as the Democratic nominee for president in 1864 against Abraham Lincoln, and he will lose. And he will be beaten badly, and he will be disgraced as a general and as a failed politician, and not very well liked by Americans on either side of the war by the time the war is over. So that is George McClellan. Go ahead and move to the next QR code.